the benefit of being in a SaaS software space, there's a lot of data. And I think now the playbooks are more behavior driven versus time driven, in the sense of, are we seeing the engagement and the interaction on the platform? If we're not, this is a trigger point to have the conversations. Are we seeing change in the account? Again, it's behavioral now versus time based, and these are the triggers.
Today's successful revenue leaders once started their careers just like you and I. They faced the challenges that their careers brought to them, they rose to the occasion, and became the leaders that we admire today. Join me as we explore the skills and stories that make a great leader with a pinch of vulnerability. Hello and welcome to Sales Therapy. I'm your host, Alper Yurder. Grab a chair. This is your exclusive invitation to the therapy room, as leaders are going to be sharing their career-defining moments, their secret tips and tricks in their arsenal towards success. And I promise we'll always end on a positive note. So today in the therapy chair, we have Fadi Bassil, who is the VP of Customer Success at Incorta. He has over 20 years of experience leading and scaling pre- and post-sales teams in high-growth software companies like Alteryx and Eidos Consulting, where he led massive growth journeys from $15 million to over $120 million, actually a couple of times. So we'll talk about all of that. Fadi and I, we know each other through a community network. We'll talk about that too. So a fun conversation is waiting for you today, and lots of practical tips about being a leader in the space of customer success. So we'll talk about your success, your joy and pain, and the journey, Fadi. Welcome to Sales Therapy. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm feeling great. Thanks, Albert. Looking forward to our conversation.
Excellent. Any good therapy starts with a childhood and growing up. Your name resonates with me a lot because it's a Farsi name, right? Am I right or wrong?
Well, I think it's a Mediterranean kind of East Asian type
okay.
name. Yeah, I'm Lebanese originally.
You're Lebanese. Okay. I thought Fadi was Farsi. Okay, good. You're Lebanese, and we'll talk about the childhood and the younger years, because I love understanding how the growing up experience shapes the people we are today, how we act at work, how we perceive work. So tell us about your younger years first. Let's start from those growing up years.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like I'm Lebanese originally. Grew up in Lebanon, had my first company there, and then for people who haven't worked in the Middle East, it was a bit challenging on the cash flow collection side. So I said, hey, you know what? I'll just find a job, get a good job, get married. 5 years in, I was thinking, hey, what am I doing here? Right? I need something exciting. That's just too mundane. So packed my stuff. My wife and I just kind of flew to the UK, and now, I've been for a while in the UK. Did my MBA here, and then started the second company. I guess I didn't learn from the first, doing text mining consulting. Kept at it for a few years, but then I ended up, I guess I just like the excitement. So I ended up traveling most of the time to Oman. Now, as a side note, it's an amazing country, so definitely worth visiting. But then I guess I spent most of my weekends traveling back and forth, and it wasn't sustainable. So I said, hey, you know what? I had like a young child at the time, so I said, hey, you know what? I need to just kind of settle. And then that's how I got into Alteryx.
How old were you when you moved to London then?
So I was 28, 29.
Ah, okay. I moved when I was 30.
Yeah.
So, around a similar time. And did you wake up to a frosty, icy UK morning this morning as well?
This morning? Yeah. So I live down in Kent, and most of the time it's nice. But but to be honest, I think like it's needed. Winter was late this year.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'm happy with that. Yeah.
We're dying for some snow. Have you had some snow yet? You might have already.
Just a day,
okay.
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
not enough to actually enjoy it.
The last time I saw London like properly snowy, I wasn't here last year when it snowed, I think, but 3-4 years ago it was so pretty. Anyway, I get sidelined sometimes. I want to go back to the younger years a little bit, though. Before you came to the UK, Lebanon is an amazing country I love, and it's full of diversity. It's Mediterranean, sunshine is my favorite thing, blah, blah. Which city did you grow up in? Where were you born? Tell us a little bit about
Beirut. In Beirut.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was born in Beirut. I think probably to add a bit of drama, I would say like the first 10 years of my life, it was during the civil war in Lebanon. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate. Did it, I guess, affect me personally? Not necessarily directly, but probably that's kind of where it created the mindset of, hey, we need to keep on moving, right? There's always like a need to move forward, try things, don't settle.
I think that's the Lebanese psyche, isn't it? Like every Lebanese, probably you guys are like 10 times outside than inside your country, and
Yeah,
everyone's a hustler.
I mean, no, one of the hobbies is collecting passports.
Exactly.
How many passports can you have, right? Because one is never enough. But hey.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, when I get my UK passport, I think 4 years ago, it was like finally I can travel, and obviously Brexit was already there. So again, another side topic. So coming to the UK, let's start talking a little bit about your career. Can you talk us the evolvement and your journey leading up to that amazing experience at Alteryx?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like I came here, did an MBA, and then I was like in a position, all right, what do I want to do now? Get a job or again do something interesting? And I think like one of the things that probably is consistently in the back of my mind is, all right, what's out there? What's like interesting to try out? And this is where it was like at the start. So I'm talking like 2013 when it was the start of open social media becoming a thing. So like everyone's on Facebook, everyone's on forum, posting stuff. And then the tools to collect and make sense of this data is also kind of becoming available or becoming available. And then that's where like the idea, all right, let's make this something that brands can consume. And that got us into like I like myself and my co-founder got us into this consultancy on how do we get all of this rich data that's out there and help brands make sense of it. We kept at it for 3 years. But again, like as anyone who's done consultancy knows, like there's a challenge always in scale, especially when you're taking something new to the market as a consultancy rather like on demand. And then we started getting kind of projects broadly outside the UK. And in parallel, like my first child, my daughter was born. She was 4 at that point, 4 months. And I was thinking, hey, you know what, like, that's not sustainable. Like over like weekends and stuff like that. So I need to do something that's more reasonable. So I stopped that and then moved into Alteryx, into consulting. So Alteryx kind of, for context, it's a BI and analytics. So still within the analytics and data space, probably more established. So landed into consulting. I landed into like pre-sales and customer success, like sales engineering by chance. But I guess we can get into that. But that's kind of, I got into Alteryx, into consulting. Yeah, I mean, to keep it short, as a side note, we were sitting in the office. So EMEA, the whole of EMEA was being run from the UK. And then the head of EMEA said, hey, we need a French speaker because we're starting to sell into France. And I don't have anyone who knows the product. Anyone's interested? So yeah, I am. So that was like my first sales engineering role. And then that's how kind of I fell into sales engineering. Yeah. And then I grew from there, built the EMEA team at Alteryx, kept at it for 6 years, and then now moved to Incorta, which is another BI analytics solution.
We'll come to that.
Here for like 2.5 years.
Generally in this section, I ask people about their career-defining moments. So for you, it was the parlez-vous français moment, I guess.
I mean, I would say like potentially it's been like a few moments across this journey. I think it's
so tell us some highs and lows then.
Yeah. So I would say like it's possibly combinations of highs and lows, like finding the opportunity to set up a consultancy in the UK. That's definitely a high, but then getting to a point where I would say where my biggest takeaway at some point was that I got to learn to sleep on the plane, irrespective of what time it is or how long the flight is. And I think that's a skill. And just wake up fresh on the other side. And then exactly like another one being, hey, parlez-vous français, and then picking up that job and then just kind of growing. But I think like probably career defining moments, just kind of looking at things that come my way and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, why not? Give it a try. See what happens.
Yeah. I think that risk appetite, first of all, of course, it's in the DNA, the Lebanese in you, I think will say, let's take risks. But also, things like, for example, I'm a migrant, I changed 5 countries and always work permits and stuff was an issue, money was an issue. So now being a founder, some people say it's a luxury. It is true, because only at the age of 38 now I'm a citizen where I can travel freely. I do have a bit of stability, blah blah blah. So those things are actually the defining moments in your career, not just like opportunities presenting, but like how your overall life aligns with your career, I guess.
100%, 100%. And again, like having like life changes outside work, again, that defines decisions around work. Getting a new child, moving places, all of them influence decisions. Again, there's no kind of better or worse. These are kind of the spots on a journey.
Yeah, exactly. Coming to that Alteryx experience, I think numbers always excite people. As the book Le Petit Prince suggested, give numbers to adults. They will always be amazed by that. And of course, we are amazed by the shiny, 15 million to 120 million experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What were you doing? How did your first experience with these pre-sales, engineering, customer success, these terms started? Again, highs and lows. Let's hear the juicy story there.
Yeah, so in a way, being into sales engineering, I think at that point, Alteryx was successful globally, but then getting established in EMEA, whereby I was the second SE, and then the whole group in EMEA was 8 people. So while yes, it's an established brand, and that's the nice thing. It's like a startup environment, but within where there is funding, right? And you would know this. So there's less challenge about like funding.
Yes, I
but
do.
Then it's still startup-y. Right? So that's something that's less kind of we have to worry less about. And then just going through the phase of really like 6 years there, growing from the UK, expanding into the different regions in the market year over year. For those who are in SaaS, it is a land and expand model, or it was a land and expand model. Probably it still is. With and the nice thing about it, I think that we can get to this about like the conversations today about like does CSM make sense or not. But without going on a tangent right now, I think like it was at a point where it just made sense to have account executives and sales engineers own the account, land the account, expand the account, and you're owning the full life cycle of the customer. And then that obviously I mentioned like the French component, but then okay, let's expand into the markets. And as you grow and you're growing the team and expanding into EMEA, and that's something that American companies in a way, especially coming to Europe, have to, I guess, in many cases have to learn from what I've seen. Is EMEA is not one region. EMEA is probably like 30 different markets that operate very differently. And then figuring out how do you then negotiate the differences, when does it make sense to go into the markets, at what phase, what to prioritize, how to test it out, how to rely on the partners.
What funding
and being
stage?
This early on,
What funding stage was this when you started?
So if I remember correctly, I think Alteryx was a Series E at that point.
Oh wow, already. Okay.
They've been in business already for 15 years.
Okay.
Doing really well in the US.
Yeah, I had that
came to EMEA.
Yeah, I had that experience just before actually acquisition, and it resonates. Obviously, it's still a startup, but at the same time you have money, but at the same time you're becoming more corporate. The old folks hate the new way of working. The new folks are a bit more like, they have a bit more salary because you're getting the more experienced people. The commission structures change. Oh my God. I don't know. Did you have any of those things as well?
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's interesting because you mentioned this, because in a way, that was kind of that, like when I joined was somewhat of the transition period. So I joined like late 2015, and then Alteryx went public in 2017. So you can think of it as 2016 being like that transition period between being private and public, and like the whole setup of going there. It's fun. It's definitely fun. It's definitely like a good learning experience with the right bunch of people.
If anyone's in those shoes right now, like if any of our listeners are, you were heading up the CS team, right? Like, sales engineering team.
So the sales engineering, but sales engineering was full life cycle.
Full life cycle.
So pre and post sales.
So how was that experience? And I guess like, what advice would you give to anybody who is going through that at the moment, based on your experience?
Yeah, so I think the biggest, learning, looking in hindsight, is accepting the fact that in high growth companies at that stage in this transition, change, potentially annual change, sometimes more frequent, is a given. And in most cases, that's for the better, as in figuring out the changes to the playbooks, messaging, how do we become more precise, how do we expand, how do we tune to the market. So one part is change. Now, the other, I think, and that would be a personal defining moment, I would say, in my career, is through this constant change, again, people is a big component. And a leader's role is to take people on this journey. Change, obviously, is uncomfortable. Exactly. And being aware that it's a responsibility of the person to be able to, one, know this, take it into consideration, and make sure they are making the change as seamless as possible. Obviously, it cannot be completely seamless, but taking the human component, really.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between like being the doer, learning how to do, creating the playbook, then trying to onboard people, different skill sets. And I don't think, although we presented always like career is linear, it's not. Like some things people like, some things they don't. You know, you might love the client interaction, but not love creating that process and trying to train everybody on it, right? So I'm curious, like, what were your responsibilities when the team was smaller when you joined, and then how did they evolve as it got bigger?
Yeah, and I would think it's maybe somewhat typical of these transitions where it initially is more of a player coach type role. And then I would say, and I have two different experiences, my current experience versus the experience at Alteryx, and they are both valid. And I would say they are important in again, broadening or kind of rounding someone's skill set. In Alteryx's days, because I would like to talk a little bit as well about kind of the current role, because it's slightly different. In Alteryx's days, again, as a player coach, growing a team and being part of the team makes a lot of things easier, in the sense of having the initial respect when you're one of the early folks on the ground. Knowing and being in someone's shoe almost creates like the inherent sense of people respecting you and listening to you. And there's less of a need to develop it. Now, the flip side to this, though, is over time, as the role transitions from, like when then there are managers in place, and there are directors in place, and there are like 3 layers of folks right, operating the business, then the transition becomes, all right, how do I learn or unlearn being a doer?
I love
because
that.
One of the roles of a leader is taking a step back and thinking, are we actually doing the right thing? Do we need to look at something totally differently? Do we need to get a fresh perspective, right? Do I need to hire someone external who thinks completely opposite to me because I'm stuck in my thought process? And being stuck to what I do makes it much more challenging.
I absolutely love that. How do I unlearn being a doer? Oh God, that's so nice and juicy. You gave us a gentle nudge there to coming to today, which is the third section of the show generally. So coming to today, I want to talk a little bit about more the current issues CS is dealing with and you are dealing with. I generally like to ask the question in this way, but feel free to respond in your way. Generally, I go,
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay, so what brought you to therapy today? What problems are you solving in your business?
Yeah. So I think problems, I would say 2023, 2024, the theme of this year, I think personally, and it seems like it's a broad theme, is how can I do a lot more with less?
Great.
Now, that's a constant in business. A constant in business. What makes it different, though, is there's a sense that this is now reality, and therefore we need to figure this out. And it has multiple components, and I want to go back to the human element to it, because doing more with less is two parts. How can I protect churn using the limited resources that I have? And that's a combination of technology and people. The other component of doing less with more is, how do I incentivize and keep the individuals on my teams productive and positive without all of the port, spiffs, bonuses, like all of the financial incentives that are historically there, which were kind of somewhat of an easy answer to drive positive engagement. So that's kind of the constant part. And I think where we're executing and I'm executing on personally. And I see like this is again in a lot of the conversation and a lot of the folks that I've watched on your podcast as well in previous episodes. It's really going to basics, but then executing on the basics perfectly. Right? But I see this, so like separate to this, one of the things I guess that I've been a constant hobby of mine over the last like 4 years now is martial arts, and specifically like kickboxing and then coaching around kickboxing. And I see a lot of, because like amateur level, you see like everyone doing all of these fancy moves and like spinning and jumping and like just kind of trying to be impressive. And then as you go up into the professional level, you see like everyone is sticking to the basics, but they execute them perfect, like perfect timing, perfect movement.
I love that.
And that's what we need to do in business.
So what are those basics you are trying to execute perfectly, Len? Give us a few practical
so within
examples.
Within customer support and customer success, I think like a few things. One, being super clear on what is it that's adding value in the interactions with the customer. Everything else that we deem fluff should go away, because again, when you have the same amount of hours in the day, a lot of fewer individuals on the team, you need to be very, very prescriptive about what you're engaging on. In the processes, obviously, definitely doing a deep dive in process reviews. Again, what is it that we can optimize? What is it that we can take away completely? Can we look at something totally different? And again, like probably bringing in Elon Musk. He's a divisive character, but I recently saw that one of his drivers of success is the fact that he looks at something that's been done for a long, long time, and then thinking, all right, if I go back to basics and then redo this from the start, do I actually need everything that I'm doing in here? Can I cancel it? And I think that's essential today.
Oh, I love that. And last night we had our founders dinner and we were thinking, what would you do differently if you were building Flowla from scratch again? And I think that was kind of a similar conversation. Okay, Fadi, you've given me so much. I'm like, okay, which direction I go, but I think I know where I want to go. I do have a few, generally in this section, I take a few of the practical questions that our users ask me, and then I relay them back to my guest. And they do their best or not. So, for example, doing more with less is definitely something that everyone's struggling with. And I'm wondering, is there a way to share tools, budgets, processes across the revenue team to make things a bit more effective, to make things, or processes even, more effective? And does that actually create value, or does that maybe create some friction?
I think that's a very good question, Alper. And I think I would like to get on something that, again, one level higher. Along the same line of what you're asking, I think one of the things of doing more with less is actually at the leadership level, looking at it as a leadership team with everyone responsible for the business versus responsible for their function. And again, nothing new. It's taking a step back and saying my primary responsibility is to the business and my peers on the leadership level or on the executive level.
Yeah, but that's difficult.
And if that is
you
the
say
case,
there. I mean, that's you're saying the ideal thing, but let's get real. Like, okay, you have a team you need to motivate, and the other guy has their team they need to motivate. You know, the traditional things like commission, blah blah. That's already getting blurry because there's convergence and CS is becoming even more important in business. I mean, sorry for cutting you there, but I just want to make it real for people. How do you navigate that friction?
But this is where, again, we go back into the practicality of your question. So with this in mind, then the practicality of the question is, so if we are looking at it as a group of executives or a group of peers, where are the points of savings? Where are the points of collaboration? What are the things that we can reuse or share? If I am looking at it as an information exchange, then do I actually need to have separate systems for everyone? Or can we collaborate? Again, scale of the business, maturity of the business comes into picture. But then part of it is that mindset.
I think
going back on...
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we did mention, because it goes to the point on incentivizing and how do we do it outside commission. The other part of the human element of this is actually then the focus of spending more time with the individuals, with coaching, like focusing on coaching. Again, back to basics. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. I think the challenge is the basic human psychology.
But it's time. It's time.
Well, it's time because the buyer dictates, the economy dictates. But the problem there, for example, with collaboration, no, like everybody knows, don't get siloed, collaborate, etc. But I think we go into our day-to-day routines, and days become weeks, weeks become months. We don't even speak those things, unless you have some conscious nudges in your
Yeah.
process to say, hey, it's been a month and we haven't had a chat about this incentive or this I don't know, efficiency. Let's have that. And I think that becomes really difficult when things are stressful as well. Like, money is low. You need to be
Yeah.
concerned about other things. But nudges, I guess, I would
And
say.
100%. So it's not just, and if we go back to execution again, it's the discipline, right? It's
Yeah.
figuring out, all right, it is the importance of actually having team conversations. It is the importance of setting time to align, like you mentioned, and that's part of leadership. It's not easy.
And in the current role, you mentioned there are parallels, but there are differences to Altric's experience. Like, what is your main remit right now? Like, what are you trying to achieve and improve in 2024, for example?
So where priority for me in 2024 is really protecting revenue, an objective of zero churn. I mean, however, again, this is executed against, but it's really zero churn, while making sure that I have high retention within the team, high efficiency within the team, and a positive culture. Now it's still a growth business, and obviously the other side of this is making sure that new business. I mean, we have a new business, is driving new business. And the collaboration. So I'll give you a practical example of collaboration. It's common in some places it's not. Customer success post-sales playing a role in the pre-sales cycle, because they bring in realistic value. They bring in peer relationships, right? Everyone today is talking about one of the key selling points is like a CFO buys from another CFO before they buy from the salesperson, before they buy from the vendor. How do you create these relationships? Again, post-sales can play a significant part of this, along with other teams, obviously. And this is where collaboration comes into the picture, where I'm looking, all right, we're no longer into this phase where, it's not my job to be in pre-sales when I'm part of a post-sales team. No, we're all looking at this growth target. We're all looking at this revenue target. When I'm protecting revenue, I'm also helping the sellers not have to worry to fill the bucket, which is very common in SaaS.
Okay, there's a lot of good stuff, which is very much in line with what we preach in our strategy too. Like, we just brought a CS expert before a salesperson, for example. Honestly, the way I see our process right now, our whole sales playbook, the first contact, we don't call it a demo. It's a guided discovery, I guess. It's all about hand-holding, understanding the problem. The first contact, to me, is like the first touch of onboarding, to be honest. Am I going to onboard you or am I not going to onboard you? And if I'm not going to onboard you, how do I make you an ally, a friend? How can I give you an advice, a tip? So I think that mentality of always be closing sales, manufacturing line, it's kind of gone out the window. I hope. It's never been my experience or what I preach, but do you feel like sellers are adapting to this new reality where client success is becoming even more crucial, important, collaboration is becoming more important? Do you feel like they get it?
So I think it's a transition. It's a transition period where there's again, and it's like depending on the vendor. I think like I'm in the lucky position of being both part of a vendor, but then also being a buyer in my role. And the way I see it is a transition where there's a tension between, we have existing playbooks that have proved successful in the past, and then we need to do them. An example being a QBR, where as a buyer I would sit on a QBR and thinking, all right, why am I here like for 50 minutes? Like there's literally nothing else. They are showing the data that I already know. So what's the point? But then also moving into solutions, and one of the things probably that I'd mentioned, and I'll do the plug for Flowla, because one of the things, like I gave you a feedback on this, what I look for as a buyer today is really the solution and the vendor that I'm trying to buy from moving out of my way, right? Because I don't care about the technology as a buyer. I don't care about who is it that's doing it. What I care about is, does it solve my problem? And if it solves my problem with the minimal interaction and minimal learning, I mean, that's even better, right? Because I can solve my problem now, not in 2 weeks' time when someone has taken me through like 20 demos and like 7 trainings. And I think this is where businesses are transitioning into, all right, so if these are the buyers, and again, it's a transition, it's probably a generation of buyers, then we need to change how we sell. And then on the flip side, it goes to training. I mean, today, if I look at myself, probably half of the time I go and learn stuff off YouTube. If I look at my children who are 9 and 6, I mean, probably when they are the buyers, I mean, they do everything online. Like there's nothing that they need to learn. They don't go and ask anyone. Everything is online. And I guess that's the change that we're going through right now.
Yeah. And how do you have the buyer at the center of things? How do you remove friction, complexity? I mean, it's really difficult because buyers, based on our research, they want more autonomy, availability, but at the same time, they still want the human interaction. You know, when they have a question, they want it to be solved immediately. So it's gonna be fun to watch all that. And one stat that I want to share actually on the call is I read somewhere about this buyer trend. In 25, I think over half the buyer persona will be women, like buying from vendors, like in those buying decision-making positions. I think it was a Gartner study. And I was like, wow, I mean, that's a fascinating fact. And then people are asking me, in our influencer almanac, we just mentioned how the Gen Z is already changing the world of sales and etc. And they were like, do you think it really has an impact? I'm like, yeah, because that's now becoming 30% of your workforce, and how they buy and how they interact, you know, is becoming your reality. So yeah, fun times.
And I think part of it is going back and taking a step back and saying, all right, so we had, like, as we're building our ICPs, we have some assumptions about the personas that we're creating in these ICPs. What have changed, right? Which assumptions are no longer valid?
Before we come to the end, I have one question which probably is in everybody's mind. Maybe if you have any tips, tricks, your secret sauce, this is the one. How do I make sure my contracts get renewed and I don't lose clients? What are your top tips, learnings from this over decades of experience to help people, to help founders who might be listening to improve that?
It may not be a popular comment, but I think going back to like the very, very early steps of the sales process and making sure that we're selling actually the right solution to the right buyer. But then once something is sold, what a buyer wants is really value realization, and putting this as the critical step in a post-sales process. How do I work with my buyer to define their value, not my value, not whatever I'm preaching, but their value and their perspective? And then how do I deliver to that? And then keeping the relationships. But obviously, I mean, if someone is in sales, that's a core skill, irrespective. Again, challenges when original sales don't fit, or we don't help the customer realize value, their value, not our value, or we have like a wrong definition of their value. Right. And then third, we're not multi-threaded. Like we have one champion, the champion leaves, and then we're stuck.
Just making a note of that. So I think one thing I'll add to that is generally I like getting this idea from my CS leader guests. How far in advance do you start looking into a contract? Like, you know, how far in advance before renewal date, or do you have like a scale you need to start taking actions? And I know, like, okay, you have to have an ongoing relationship, blah blah, but like, do you start 3 months in advance to do X, or do you have those kind of triggers?
Yeah, so I think where we've moved in court, and I've seen it in many of the analytics companies, and I think like that's kind of the benefit of being in a SaaS software space. There's a lot of data, and I think now the playbooks are more behavior driven versus time driven, in the sense of, are we seeing the engagement and the interaction on the platform? If we're not, this is a trigger point to have the conversations. Are we seeing change in the account? Again, it's behavioral now versus time based, and these are the triggers.
I love that, and it actually is a nudge to me to ask the question in that way. So rather than time driven and waiting for something to happen, like, look at the behaviors. Are we getting the right behaviors? Signals, I guess, right?
Okay. Yeah, and that's the benefit of, right, having a SaaS platform. You see what the user, ideally you see what the users are doing.
And on Flowly you see it too. Shameless plug there. Cool. So nice. This has been an amazing conversation, Fadi. Thank you. I think there's a lot we could cover more, but unfortunately we're coming to the end of our time, and like any good therapist, I have to close the show on time. Any closing remarks before we go?
I mean, it's been a pleasure. I think one of the things that we need to keep on focusing on with everything that's changing again, just the human element of all of this. I think as people build experience, I think we owe it to the next group after us to support them around this, irrespective of what's the role. I think that's important.
I completely agree with that. And I think a few takeaways from this conversation which were really practical for me. And by the way, the last few shows I've been taking notes and, going in front. If anyone's watching it, they might be feeling like, okay, is this guy not listening? Whereas I'm actually making like handwritten notes because probably I'm a boomer. But there were so many. I had two pages of notes on this conversation, and I thank you so much for it. It's a pleasure. My side too.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for sharing that as well. Thank
Excellent.
You. I appreciate that.
That's a wrap on this episode of Sales Therapy. If you enjoy the show, watch us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify. You know where to find us on LinkedIn. Probably Fadi is there to be found too. And also, I maybe forgot to mention, but Fadi is the CS chapter head of our London community in Pavilion. And I think he's accessible through that community too. It's been a joy. Thank you very much. And watch us in the next episode of Sales Therapy. Bye.